So let's begin. Good afternoon and a warm welcome to everyone who is with us right now on this call, as well as everyone who's following this conversation via live stream. Yes, welcome and nice that you are with us today. My name is Sophia Karimi and I'm a program curator at the Goethe Institute Amsterdam. And this event is a collaboration between us, Goethe Institute Netherlands, and Spire 25, the academic cultural center of UvA, just around the corner from here in Amsterdam. This event today follows the State of the European Literature Program and the European Literature Night from last week, where Pierre Jarawan was physically with us. Unfortunately, he had to leave Amsterdam earlier than planned due to new quarantine regulations. So we decided to host this conversation line. This way he could already go back to Munich a bit sooner in order to have less time in quarantine. And I'm really happy that we can actually make it work this way. He already told me that the quarantine was lifted from him this morning when he received his negative test results. So that is really good news. About today. The idea for this conversation came quite spontaneously after the recent devastating explosions in Beirut. And I think those pictures shocked us all. The catastrophic explosions at the heart of the city, uncovering ruins of socio-economic imbalances, have left Beirut's community with tears and blood. Personally, I'm not only shocked and deeply sad to see this level of destruction and grief, but I am also really confused. I do not understand what is happening in Lebanon. I do not understand the relations between detonations and revolutions, demonstrations, government, society, politics, the past and the present. I did read Pierre's books, though. I have them here with me in German, if you can see them. And I do truly believe in broadening one's perspective with and through literature and stories. So I hope to understand a little bit more what is happening in Lebanon after this talk. And we do not only have author Pierre Jarawan with us today, but also Michael Lezenberg, who is professor at the Department for Philosophy, the UvA, and participates in the MA program Islam in the Modern World. Thank you, Pierre and Michael, already for sharing your perspectives with us. And I wish us all a deepening of understanding and a broadening of our horizons. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I believe I'm the one to do the proper content introduction for Pierre Jarawan. I hope you can all hear me. Can those who can hear me perhaps stick up a thumb or, okay, great. Yes, welcome to all of you. Thanks to Sophia for her introduction. I'm quite honored to be here in this distinguished company. Of course, there's a bit of an irony because a Dutch institute and a German author communicate in English, but of course that's multilingualism for you. I'm very happy to give you a very short introduction of Pierre Jarawan, who's perhaps famous and well known to all of you. And I will do so also by reading a bit from his first novel that was translated into Dutch. And then I will give the floor to Pierre himself, and he will talk for, I think, about 45 to 50 minutes with images and statistics, even to present a bit more background information about the recent situation in Lebanon and its longer history. And then after that, we can have a short discussion until about 6:30. All participants are warmly invited to submit questions by the Q&A button to the right of the lower side of the screen. So if you have a question to ask of the author or of anybody else in the room for that matter, you can submit that through that channel. And then after Pierre finishes his own talk, we can discuss those questions. So feel free to ask anything you might find of interest. Okay, well, Pierre Jarawan probably hardly needs introduction to a Dutch audience of literature lovers. He was born in 1985 in Jordan from a Lebanese father and a German mother. His parents had just fled Lebanon because, of course, the 1980s were the time when the civil war in Lebanon was raging in all its violence. When Pierre was 3 years old, his parents moved with him, of course, to Germany. And he has grown up there, but as he told me, he has visited Lebanon on quite a regular basis in his youth. And not only was he an aspiring young poet and novelist, he was quite early active with various poetry slams. And I think, I forgot exactly the details, but he won one poetry slam a couple of years ago. But not only that, of course, Pierre has always been busy with Lebanese history and Lebanese politics, which is almost impossible to avoid if you have a background in that area. And I just heard that actually he was planning a visit to Lebanon in 2006, when already with his airplane tickets in his hands, he was told by the airline company that it was not possible for him to fly to Beirut because the Israeli Air Force was just bombing the airport there. This was exactly the same time when also Dutch novelist Abdelkader Ben Ali was staying in Beirut, originally with the purpose of improving his standard Arabic, but instead he wound up writing a whole book about this war in Lebanon. So the country is almost always catching the news with one tragic story after another, but of course there's lots of Lebanese history, a lot of Lebanese life behind the headlines. And I think that a novelist like Pierre is best qualified to tell us about that, to present Lebanon beyond the journalism. And he has been doing so, especially also recently in several novels. First of all, in 2016 was the novel, oh, sorry, I got the wrong one. Apologies. Am Ende bleiben die Zedern, which was translated into Dutch as De Zoon van de Verhalenverteller, which is a very liberal translation, but it nicely fits the content, actually. And most of you probably know that this novel in Holland got quite a lot of airplay because in the famous Dutch TV program De Wereld Draait Door, this book was promoted to the Book of the Month, which led to a lot of discussion, a lot of attention for the book, which I think was more than deserved. So I was quite happy about that. This novel was about a person almost exactly Pierre's age. Perhaps we can talk about the autobiographical backgrounds later on, but it's about somebody who is born to parents who are also from Lebanon, but who moved to Germany in the mid-1980s. And I'm not going to give too much of the story away, but it's in part at least a suspenseful thriller because the narrator's father disappears when this boy is 8 years old in 1992. And then it takes several decades until this boy actually visits Lebanon for the first time in search of his father, or at least in search of traces of his father. He wants to find out what has happened and why he has disappeared all of a sudden. And gradually the audience, the reader, gets to know more not only about the character and his family relations and his loves and his friendships, but also more and more about the violent past of Lebanon, in particular the Civil War and its most tragic moments, especially in the 1992 episodes that many of us are still familiar with. So if you haven't read that novel yet, do make an effort to get your copy. And as if that weren't enough, recently his second novel was translated into Dutch, Ein Lied für die Vermissten, which was translated as Een Lied voor de Vermissten. We will mostly be talking about the latter novel today, but the other novel, of course, is at least as interesting and at least as moving. And as a short introduction, before I give Pierre the floor, I would like to read you a short passage from this novel, which is at the start of the book when the young narrator is describing how he and his father are walking in a German town where they have moved after having fled Lebanon. Perhaps I should apologize in advance to my colleagues at the Goethe Institute because some nasty comments are made about Germans in this passage, but well, given that they're about Arabs or Lebanese, about Nordic Europeans, I can assure you they would apply to Holland just as much as they apply to Germany. Okay, here we go. Mijn vader zong. Ook wat dat betreft was hij een echte Arabier. Hij liep op straat te zingen en trok zich niks van de blikken aan. Duitsers zingen niet luidkeels op straat, zei hij eens tegen me, toen we hand in hand van de markt naar huis wandelden, beladen met tassen vol verse groenten en fruit. Waarom niet? Vroeg ik. Omdat ze het te belangrijk vinden wat anderen van ze denken. Ze geloven dat ze voor gek worden verklaard als ze zingen op straat. Misschien ben jij wel gek? Misschien wel. Hij knipoogde naar me, pakte een appel uit zijn tas, beet erin en stak hem me toe. Maar misschien zouden ze ook liever zingen op straat en durven ze niet, omdat ze denken dat je daar een vergunning voor moet hebben. Hij maakte zich er graag vrolijk om dat je in Duitsland overal een vergunning voor moest hebben. Meestal tegenover moeder, dat had ik een paar keer gehoord en ik wist dus dat het schertsend bedoeld was. En toen zong hij. Behebbak ya Lubnan, ya watani, behebbak. Bishmalak, bijnubak, besaghlak, behebbak. Ik hou van jou, Libanon, mijn land. Ik hou van jou. Je noorden, je zuiden, je velden. Ik hou van jou. Ik drukte zijn hand steviger. Dat lied kende ik. Ik kende de zangeres. Ik had haar stem al vaak gehoord. Een stem doordrongen van smachtende droefheid en poëzie, die in vrijwel alle liederen de melodie licht overheerste. Fayrouz, dat was haar naam. Iedereen in Libanon hield van Fayrouz. Ze was de harp van de Oriënt, de nachtegaal van het nabije Oosten, die op podia de liefde voor haar vaderland bezong. Iemand, ik geloof dat het Hakim was, noemde haar de moeder van alle Libanezen. Zo liepen we naar huis terwijl vader zong. Ik stemde op zeker moment met hem in. De mensen die vreemd naar ons keken, konden ons niks schelen. Eigenlijk begonnen we steeds luider te zingen naarmate meer mensen ons pad kruisten. En het interesseerde ons niet dat we nauwelijks toon hielden. Onze handen waren verstrengeld, de boodschappentassen ritselden in de wind en we zongen in het Arabisch, omdat we in het Duits niet zouden kunnen uitdrukken wat we op dat moment voelden. This is only the opening of a beautiful novel, so do get a chance to read it. I can warmly recommend it. But with these comments, I would like to give the floor to Pierre himself, and he will be presenting his own story with slides. So we hope technology is going to support us with that. Pierre, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Michel. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for reading. Your Arabic is really good. It sounded very authentic. I actually used to read that same fragment when I do my readings. So I liked that you chose that one. So just for me to understand, you want me to give the whole talk now, or just shall I interrupt after a couple of minutes to talk about what we've seen?
I was told that technically it will be difficult for me to interrupt you because I will be switched off in a second.
Okay.
So it's perhaps easiest if you just give your talk, and then when you finish, we can have a short discussion and questions also from the audience. So members of the audience are warmly invited to send their questions through the Q&A channel also during Pierre's talk, because only I and perhaps some members from the Goethe Institute can see it and can be distracted by the questions. Thanks. Pierre, the floor is yours.
Okay. Well, thanks so much. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you for inviting me to this talk. And yeah, as we said, I prepared a very short presentation. I'm not sure if it will take 45 minutes. It's probably going to be less. Well, I'm going to show you some pictures I took in Lebanon. I'm going to show you some pictures from the research I did in Lebanon in order to write the second novel. And we're going to talk about the central theme of the second book, which is the people that have disappeared in the Lebanese civil war. But we will also talk about the very unique Lebanese political system, and I'm going to try to explain it to you with some charts I'm going to show you. And then in the end, I'm very happy to take your questions, and maybe we can get into a discussion. So let me just quickly share my screen with you. And so I hope you can now see that. So what we see here is is a very short or quick size comparison between Germany and Lebanon. Of course, the Netherlands is a bit smaller than Germany, but still you get an impression of how tiny Lebanon is, because yeah, it is a very, very small country. It has only, yeah, let's say 6 million inhabitants. It really depends on which sources you look at, because the population has not been counted since the 1930s. So let's say 6 million is a safe number. Maybe you have heard that Lebanon has taken in 2 million Syrian refugees. So that means Lebanon is the country that has taken in most refugees per head in the world, which is a third of its own population. So in Germany, we have 80 million inhabitants, which means we would have to take in about, let's say, 23 million refugees just to get yeah, the same size or the amount of people in percentage that Lebanon has taken in. I'm going to show the next chart, which is just quickly showing you where Lebanon is located. I'm sure you knew that. So you can see Israel is a neighboring country in the south, and you can see that Syria is basically surrounding Lebanon. So Lebanon is kind of a safe harbor for many Syrian refugees that live in the surrounding area. That is why so many people have gone there. Also, so many people have gone to Turkey, of course, because it is a neighboring country for Syria in the north. And it is said that the explosion in Beirut was people in Cyprus. You see Cyprus on the upper left. Cyprus, people on Cyprus were able to feel the explosion in Beirut. So you get an idea of how devastating this explosion was. We're going to end this presentation with the explosion. So what I'm going to show you now is, you have heard so many things about Lebanon, which probably, or if you haven't heard many things, you probably have your own ideas about that country. And I'm going to show you some pictures that might be contradicting the image of the country you have in mind, or at least add a new perspective. So what you're going to see first is some pictures I took myself in Lebanon. On the upper left, you're seeing the beach. It's not a sandy beach, it has rocks, but it is a beach where I spent many vacations during my childhood. It is the beach that is close to my aunt's house. She lives in Anfe, which is a small fisher town north from Beirut. Yeah, that's where the Lebanese youth spend their weekends. They go from Beirut there because it's so nice to spend the weekend there. And yeah, it's just a nice place. And on the upper right, the sunset picture is basically taken from my aunt's roof. So I'm standing on the roof of my aunt's house taking that picture. You see the houses are flat, so you can stand on the roofs. And basically this is my aunt's house, and this is the view if you look towards the ocean. And the picture on the left side in the lower row is the Corniche in Beirut, which is a famous street that is, you can just walk there for many kilometers along the ocean, and people, it's maybe one of the few public places in Beirut where people can come together, because it is a city that lacks public spaces very much, which is problematic, but I'm going to talk about that later. Of course, if you want a society to meet, and if you want a society to talk with each other instead of about each other, you need public spaces where they can meet. But Beirut really lacks these spaces. On the right picture is just it's Beirut. All the houses you can see in this picture. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but what you see, the houses, just the houses you see in that picture, they are also destroyed from that explosion. But it is a famous site where the Beirutis, they go to swim. Okay, the next picture, the next slide is it sums up the fact that there are so many archaeological sites in Lebanon that are so interesting to visit. Let's start with the left picture. This left picture is somehow, for me, it's a symbol of Lebanon, because what you see here is, you should pay attention to the details I'm going to talk about. So in the background, forget about the mosque, let's look at the background. You see a house that's basically being built right now. And this shows you that the whole reconstruction of Beirut is still going on, or has been going on until the explosion. And we're talking about 30 years, because the Lebanese Civil War, it went on from 1975 until 1990. So 30 years past the Civil War, the city has still been rebuilt and reconstructed. And whenever I visited Beirut, the only thing you could rely on was that it looked different when you went there the next year, and the sound of reconstruction, of reconstruction sites in the city. It was the only thing you could really rely on. They were always there, because there was always reconstruction going on. In the foreground, it doesn't look too spectacular, but these are Roman baths that are more than 1,000 years old. And this is also typical Lebanon, because in other cities you would see archaeologists, you would see people, taking care of that place, but not in Beirut. And why is that typical Lebanon? Because it is a country that doesn't care about its past, or at least maybe you should say that it doesn't want to be reminded of its past, even the past that is more than 1,000 years old. Okay, the other picture, the harbor you see, this is Byblos. Byblos is said to be the oldest constantly inhabited city in the world. Byblos has been founded by the Phoenicians 4,000 years ago, and or maybe 5,000 years ago. And from that point on, it has always been inhabited, which makes it the oldest inhabited city in the world. And Baalbek, this is the lower on the right picture. This is just an archaeological site that is comparable to Palmyra in Syria, which you might have heard of because it was destroyed by ISIS, and also a very famous site. And then I'm going to show you some pictures of the landscape that might surprise you. Many people don't think of Lebanon and have these pictures in mind. They're just showing you what the country looks like in the mountains. So on the right, you have the famous waterfalls, which could be also, I don't know, from Middle Earth or something. Could be New Zealand. Also on the left side, the lower pictures on the mountains. It's a church there where you can hike, and this is a typical on the upper left side. It is a typical village in the mountains in Lebanon. So if you'd drive from Beirut, you'd probably need 1 hour to get there, and these are the villages that you would see in the mountains. They look like this. And what's maybe, if you want to understand my my work, or at least my why I feel the urge to write about that country, is because it made a transformation for me. When I was a child, the Lebanon I knew was the Lebanon I just showed you. So it was a country that was full of beauty and full of interesting sights to see. But it was always a country that I romanticized, but I only realized that a couple of years ago. Because obviously there were so many things going wrong in that country, and politics, things in society. We're going to talk about that quickly in a minute. But I have always been, or looking at Lebanon from Germany as my second home. We went there every summer to visit my family on my father's side. So cousins, my grandmother, aunts, they are still all there. And I always saw the country in summertime for 6 weeks, then went back to Germany. And this is the country I met exclusively until, and it was mentioned in the introduction, 2006, just this picture. This is the harbor. To finish this 2006, I'm gonna talk about this year in a minute. Just this picture to sum that up. What you see here is the harbor, and this harbor is where the explosion happened and it was destroyed. But you see how small the country is, because the mountains, behind these mountains, there's Syria. So basically Lebanon, this is Lebanon. What you see here, this is the whole country. It goes, of course, further north and further south, but behind these mountains, there's Syria. And these mountains are covered with snow all year long. And you know, the Lebanese say that in our country, you can go skiing in the morning and you can take a bath in the Mediterranean Sea in the afternoon, and they're right, you could do that. It's possible. But yeah, just to give you an impression of how tiny that country really is, because it's not more than what you see here. It's just goes a little bit further north and further south, but this is the width of the country. Okay, and I talked about 2006, and this was the year where things changed for me, because 2006 Beirut looked like this, and I was. What you see here is today known as the July War, or the 33-day war with Israel. It came so that the Hezbollah, you've heard of Hezbollah probably, they abducted 3 Israeli soldiers on the southern border. And what you see in this picture was Israel's reaction to that abduction. They bombed Beirut, not only Beirut, but basically whole Lebanon, also the airport, immediately and for 33 days. And I was on my way to visit my family when that started happening. And this year interrupted my usual visits, my annual visits to Lebanon. They were interrupted in 2006 by this war. And this was the first time I couldn't go. And also this was the first time I saw the country at war. It was the first time that it was visible, not only for me, but for the whole world, that things were going very wrong in Lebanon. Obviously, if you had read about Lebanon, or if I had read about Lebanon, and if I had, known more, it wouldn't have surprised me as much as it did. But it very much surprised me, and I didn't see this coming at all. So 2006 is basically why I wrote these novels. It changed my whole perspective, because then I started doing my research. I wanted to know more. I wanted to know why something like this can happen. I wanted to know why on earth, out of nowhere, at least that's what I was thinking, out of nowhere a war can happen. And then only when I did my research, I learned that this basically, it wasn't surprising at all. There were so many, in the country I knew and the country I loved wasn't really the country that existed, or it wasn't I only knew half the truth. It's important for me to show you both sides, because the beauty of this country that you just have seen, it's still there. It's not, it hasn't disappeared. It's still a very beautiful country to visit and just to see. But of course, landscape and archaeological sites and all this, it's not what makes a country, right? It's politics, it's society. And you see here the destruction, and I'm going to talk now about, usually, to explain, when I do this presentation, I usually show this at my readings, and I interrupt this presentation by short fragments I'm reading from the second novel. So maybe now I should just give you a short summary of the second novel that came out in the Netherlands in May. It came out in the Netherlands, and in March in Germany. So the novel it's called Lied voor de Vermisten, and it is about the 17,000 people that have disappeared in the Lebanese civil war. And you have a narrator in that novel. His name is Amin, and he grows up with his grandmother, and because his parents, they have died in a car accident, and his grandmother, when he's a baby, she takes him in exile because of the war, and when the war is over, they go back to Lebanon in 1994. And this is where the novel starts. So the exile doesn't really play a role in the book. It's the novel starts with the return to Lebanon. And he's 13 years old, and he comes into a country that's supposed to be his home, but that scares him because he sees all the destruction, but he has never experienced the violence that has caused this destruction. But he's coming into a society that is traumatized somehow. He discovers that there must be secrets in his family, also with his grandmother. I'm not going too much into detail about the book. I think we're going to talk about it later. Just to give you an impression of the city Amin sees for the first time in his life in 1994. I'm going to show you some pictures now, because this is also the other side of Beirut. And what you see here is the Holiday Inn Hotel. And the Holiday Inn Hotel was destroyed in the Civil War, but it is still visible like this in downtown Beirut. So this is not an old picture, it's a really an actual picture of that hotel. If you now add the explosion that happened in August, you can basically imagine most parts of the city looking like this now. But before that, when the city was still intact, it was this hotel that kind of reminded people of the war, because many hotels during the years of the Civil War were destroyed, and because they were so important for the militiamen to recover these buildings, because they were so high or so tall, and you could see, if you sat on the roof of the Holiday Inn Hotel, you controlled West Beirut basically. So this is why that hotel looks like this. And this is the city Amin meets when he's 13 years old, and it's basically unexplainable to him. And there's so much silence in that society and in that country that kind of scares him. And just another picture to show you that this is also a house that you could still see in Beirut right now. And you see the bullet holes in the wall, and you see that people are still living in that house from the laundry in the windows. But it basically shows you that this was a civil war, because so neighbors shot at each other, and this is why houses of people, really residential neighborhoods look like this. And what I'm going to show you here is a satellite picture of Beirut. Where the red dot is, this is exactly where the harbor is, and this is exactly where the explosion happened. So where the red dot is it also means this is maybe a couple hundred meters away from this. This is downtown Beirut. So it really happened close to downtown Beirut. What we also see here is that this white line dividing East and West Beirut, it's a very interesting historic fact that very few people seem to know today, that Beirut, like Berlin, was a divided city for 15 years. So from 75, when the Civil War happened or started, until 1990, so for 15 years, Beirut was divided by this white line you see here, and this is the so-called road to Damascus. And the road to Damascus it has this name because it does exactly that. It goes from the harbor in Beirut straight to Damascus. You can drive, you can stay on the road for 2 hours, you will get to Damascus. But in the Civil War, it separated East from West Beirut. In East Beirut, mostly Christians were living, and in West Beirut, mostly Muslims were living. Now, when I say Christians and Muslim, please keep in mind that there's so much more to it, of course. We in Europe, we tend to say Muslims and they throw them all in one, throw them all together. But of course, when I say Muslims, I mean Sunni Muslim, Shia Muslim, Alawite. They are just Druze, which is not Muslim. They are some a religion on their own. And in the Christians, it's the same. You have Maronite Christians, Greek Orthodox, Rome Catholic, and so on. So in Lebanon, and this is really unique, you have 18 different religious groups, and they're all equal. So there's no state religion in Lebanon, like in Saudi Arabia or Iran, where it's, you know, Saudi Arabia, it's they're Sunni Muslim, and so the Islamist state religion. It's not the case in Lebanon. You have 18 different religious groups, and 12 of them are Christian groups. So Amin meets this divided city, or the city that has in the novel, the city that has just been reunited. And interesting thing about this white line is that it was called the Green Line in the years of the Civil War. And maybe you get an idea why this line was called the Green Line. It's called like this because nobody dared to go there anymore. It was only an area where snipers went to prevent people from going from east to west and the other way around. So for 15 years, basically nobody went there. So what happened? Nature came and took the streets back. And this is what Beirut looked like after the war. So you really just look at the pictures and maybe imagine yourself in New York, and just imagine nobody going at Fifth Avenue, for example, for 15 years, and Central Park would go, you know, would grow into the city, and somehow after 15 years, parts of Fifth Avenue would look like this. That's really comparable, because we're talking about a huge city in the world that for 15 years has been divided, and when the war ended in 1990, this road to Damascus looked like this. When you go to Beirut now, you won't see anything of that. There were, after the reconstruction, they moved all the plants, and expensive shops, you know, grew there instead. Chanel, Rolex, and you name it, they all had shops in this area, and or have shops, depending on whether they were destroyed now by the explosion or not. But again, this is the city Amin meets when he's 13 years old, and while it scares him on the one hand, it also fascinates him on the other hand, because for a 13-year-old boy, this is a huge adventure city, basically. If it looks like this, it's a ghost city. Yeah, this is just a symbolic picture for the friendship that it plays an important role in the novel, because Amin has a friend and his name is Jafar, and Jafar is the one that, yeah, somehow leads Amin into Beirut's destroyed houses. They go into these ruins, and Amin admires Jafar, because Jafar has lived a life that Amin can't even imagine. Jafar never left Lebanon. Jafar has experienced the war. He is one of the children that are today called the lost generation, because just imagine a child that is born in 1975 when the war begins. Until this child is 15 years old, it has never known anything else but war. For 15 years, growing up in a war. So war was normality. And when the war ended, freedom was somehow the new, the shocking thing, because they were not used to freedom and to peace, and they were really overwhelmed by peace. It sounds, it's an interesting psychological effect that, you know, when you are born in war, it's you get to use, you get used to the violence, you get used to the, of course it traumatizes you as well, but it's your life. It's somehow, it becomes normality. And when the war ended, this generation felt lost, because they had never experienced something like this. They weren't used to go to West Beirut suddenly, or to East Beirut, without, you know, the danger of being shot or something. So Jafar is a very interesting character in the book, and there's much that connects these boys, but there's also much that separates them. So, okay, don't don't be overwhelmed by that picture. I'm going to explain it to you very slowly. This is very interesting because we're now talking about the Lebanese constitution, which is unique in the whole world. There's no other country in the world that has a constitution like this. And after this picture, I'm sure you'll understand more of what happens now, or what you can read in the news now when they talk about the corruption, about the Lebanese government, and about, you know, the state that doesn't really care about the Lebanese people, and that's maybe even responsible for that explosion. So stay with me. I'm gonna go through that in detail. So let's start in the upper left. It says, the constitution says, the Lebanese president must be a Maronite Christian. Let's go to the middle. The constitution says the Lebanese prime minister must be a Sunni Muslim. And on the right, the Lebanese speaker of parliament must be a Shia Muslim. That's what's in the constitution. You have 128 seats in the parliament. Look at the left side. 50%, which means 64 seats, are for Muslims, Sunni, Shia, Druze, Alawite, and so on. 50% on the right side are seats for the Christians, Roman Catholic, Maronite, Orthodox, minority Christian, Protestant, and so on. So Lebanon really is the only country where the parliament is not, or where the seats in the parliament are not given to political parties, but to religious groups. It's not correct to say it like this, because religious groups are parties, okay? Let's look at the next picture. You see the parliament again, and you see the colors. They stand for religions. So green, for example, Shia, dark blue, Sunni, and so on. So in Europe or in Germany, I don't know, in the Netherlands probably too, these colors stand for party. You know, the green color in Germany stands for the Green Party. The environment is important, and so on. It's not the case in Lebanon. It stands for religious groups. So I'm going back. And the interesting thing is that during the years of the Civil War, all these 18 different religious groups, they were involved in that war with their own militias. So for the Shia, let's take the Shia, for example, their militia was Hezbollah. It was founded during the years of the Civil War. It is now a party that sits in parliament. Same goes for Christian parties. You had the Force Lebanese, for example, which was a right-wing militia, and now the Force Lebanese is a political party in Lebanon. So after the war in 1990, an amnesty law was signed, and it guaranteed all these militiamen immunity from crimes they had done in the war. And they said, okay, let's close the book. We're not going to talk about that war anymore. This is over. We're going to look into the future. But this amnesty law, it basically caused that all the former militiamen, warlords, became now politicians. And they were, because of the constitution, they always are elected by the people that have their religion, or at least it used to be like this in the last years. It tends to change now with the youth that asks for change, but we're going to talk about the youth in a minute. So I hope that gives you somehow an idea of the constitution. If not, feel free to ask your question, and I'm going to answer that later. I know it's complicated, and it's even more complicated to do it via Zoom, but probably you now understand how complex it is, and it has also led to not only to corruption. Lebanon is one of the most corrupt countries in the world. There's an index, and Lebanon is always one of the top countries on that index in corruption. Just, you know, so the son-in-law of the president, he's the minister for, I think, environment, you just you name it, every position in that government is given to sons or cousins or whoever pays most. And this is a state that has abandoned people. These are basically 5 to 6 families from different religions that have always been powerful in that country, and that have taken since the end of the war that they got into power. They have never left that power, and they have never thought of giving that power away. And they have stolen from the people. They have so much money on their bank accounts. They could, rebuild Beirut with their private money, the money they have stolen over the past years from the people. And so they are billionaires or millionaires, multimillionaires. And while in Lebanon, you have one of the highest unemployment rates in the world. There's no, there's one international institution, I think it's the World Bank, maybe. They said that by the end of this year, more than 50% of the Lebanese population will live in poverty. Okay, so again, feel free to ask your question. I know it's kind of complicated and it's kind of hard to explain. It's hard for me to explain it in German to the people, and now when I'm talking English, it's even harder. So I hope it got you. You got to now have a better impression of the system there, and this is what I want to talk about. I'm close to the end of my talk with the presentation, but I want to talk about the missing, of course, because this is the central topic of the second book. And as you can see, behind that woman, 17,000 disappeared. And now you know, when I talked about the government and about the former militiamen that have done those crimes, that are now in the parliament and in the important positions, you can understand now why nobody cares about the missing, apart from the relatives. And you see that woman, you can also see these women. So basically we're talking about 17,000 missing people that have disappeared in the war, in a country that has 6 million inhabitants, or that when the war ended had maybe 4 million inhabitants. So it's a huge number of disappeared people. And it's a big taboo in the country that nobody really talks about. And the only people that talk about are the relatives, but now they are in their 70s, maybe 80s, and they don't have too much time left to tell that story. And this is also why I really wanted to write that book, because I think this is what storytelling can do. It is what stories can do. They can oppose silence. I'm not naive. I'm not thinking that it will change anything, but it opposes the silence. It offers an insight into a topic that is not being talked about. And so, yeah, it's kind of a portal or a door that you can enter through, and you will get to know a country or the wounds that the past has left on that country better, because if you talk to the people, they will not talk to you about these topics. What you see here is pictures I took in Beirut when I did my research. These are newspapers, and in these newspapers, they are from the 80s, and they are full of how do you call that, when people went missing. So the relatives, they said, okay, my husband, my son, he's missing, and they put it into the newspaper. And these newspapers are full of articles like that, where people said, we are missing someone. If you know something, call that number. And so I spent a lot of time doing that research, more than 2 years. I spent, when I wrote the book, I wrote that book for 4 years, and I deleted 300 pages while writing. And because it was so important to me to find the right sound and to write structure, and I had to do a lot of trial and error until I was confident that I found the sound I needed and the structure I needed to do justice to the complexity of the topic. So yeah, this I'm going to show you age at the time of the disappearance, and you see there's a huge, the curve is going up between 15 and 19. So you see that these people that disappeared, they were so young. They were between 15 and 19 years old. So many of the disappeared when they were teenagers. There's in part, at least, an explanation to this. 15 to 19 years was the typical age when young men assigned to the militias, because there was no other perspective. The militias told you, you get a gun, you get a monthly salary, you are basically powerful with us. So many young men, especially from the lower from the lower parts of society, they joined the militias, and they probably went missing in fights or in massacres that so many of them happened. But this is in part an explanation for that number, or for that young age. But most of the people that disappeared were civilians, and they were abducted on the streets. You can imagine Beirut, for example. There were so many militias that just closed the streets and waited. And when a car came, that car, the people in that car, they had to show their ID. And when you show your ID in Lebanon, your religion is always in your ID. So you show your ID to the militiaman, and that might just be why they kill you on site. It might have been, you had the wrong religion, and they were maybe just taking revenge for some losses they had the day before from the other side. So to equal that number, they just killed the civilians in that car, for example. So it was chaotic. It was chaos. There was no state, and this makes the case of the disappeared in Lebanon again unique if you compare it to disappearance people that have disappeared in other countries. For example, Argentina. You might have heard of Los Desaparecidos in Argentina. There are many books, even movies about the disappeared in Argentina. But it is different there because it was a military dictatorship in Argentina. You had a chain of command. You had someone on the top telling someone to abduct someone and to bring him somewhere and to make him disappear because they were, opponents in for example, in their political views. This is different in Beirut, in Lebanon, because of the war, and it was chaos. There was no state. There were no chain of commands. It was basically, I know it sounds horrible, but it was basically bad luck if you went missing, and you, yeah. The year of the disappearance is 1982. This is where the most people disappeared. This is also the year when my parents left the war, because it was just too violent. This year was so violent, and this is why my parents left. But you can also see how violent it was because it is a year most people disappeared. And to close this topic is, I know there's a lot of text on that sheet, but just look at the big numbers. On the top, on the right side, you see it's the action preferred by the families, and most families, they just want to know the fate of the missing persons, or they want searching procedures to get them back. Basically, no one wants punishment or compensation or, things like that. They just want to know the truth. They want to know what happened. Because, and I talked to some of them, and I talked to the Lebanese Red Cross that takes care of these relatives. Basically, you have to imagine their life from the day their family member disappeared, like that. Every day for 30 years, when someone knocks on the door, they think it's him, he comes back. Or when the phone rings, they think, oh, that's him, he's telling me where he is. For 30 years, every day, that's their life now. And this is, it's horrible. And again, as I said, most people, they won't have too much time to talk about that story. And I just have a couple of pictures left to lead you to the present, and then we'll open discussion. So don't get afraid. This is a theater play. What you see here, this is showing you that, you know, the importance of art in Beirut, or the role of art in dealing with the past is a very important one. What you see here is a theater play about the civil war, and that theater play is written by young actors and young people from the theater. So the questions about the past are raised by the youth. Again, what you see here is street art. Beirut is a city full of street art. You know, the upper graffiti, it says on the left, "In search of springtime," which is of course a metaphor. And what you see here, it might not be you know, a very artistic graffiti, but it's a very interesting one because it deals with the bullet holes in the houses, and it basically makes you see that house again in a new way. It basically shows you the it includes these bullet holes into the art, and thereby the art makes you see the house in a new way. It makes you might make you think about it in a new way. October 2019, you might have heard it on the news. This is when huge protests erupted in Lebanon, and you see how young these protesters are. This is again the youth, because they don't have any, they realize now they don't have any perspective in that country. If they want to, like, they basically need to leave Lebanon to achieve anything in life, because of the numbers I just told you before. The economics is so bad, everything is going down, while the government doesn't really care about the people at all. So there were huge protests, and in these protests, the people, they were still showing some kind of humor, you know, can we please put the smart people in charge now, we're on the science, or here, happiest depressed people you ever meet. This is how they define themselves in Lebanon. So they haven't lost their humor, despite all the bad economics and so on. And this was October, but the explosion, it changed everything in August 2020. Oh, this sign is also funny. Things are so bad that even the introverts are here. So really everybody went on the street. And then in August 4th, the explosion happened. You all saw these pictures. Just to give you some numbers, on that day, 300,000 people lost their homes in one day, which would be, again, compared to Germany, I think about 4 million people becoming homeless, like in an instant of a second. 4 million people. This is more than Berlin. Complete Berlin. And yeah, you see here, my government did this, a graffiti or a writing at the harbor. This is what the people think, and I think it's true, because if you have ammonium nitrate, 2,000 tons of that, in the center of the city amongst civilians for years, and nobody in the, you have people warning the government about this, and the government doing nothing to bring that away from there. This government is responsible. And you see, now you don't see any funny signs again in the demonstration. What you now see is, you know, they want the government gone. They want politicians hanging, basically, because they are fed up. This explosion has really, changed everything. And yeah, basically, I'm going to skip or exit my presentation now, so we can go back to that talk. Just a second here. Okay, so I hope that gave you a little bit a better insight now into the country. It was a lot of talking, a lot of information, but maybe we can sort that out now in the talk.
Okay, thanks very much, Pierre, for this beautiful, if at times very depressing, but certainly spellbinding talk. We have already a couple of questions arriving, but let me start by asking one concrete question first. And by now you'll probably think it's a stupid question because you basically answered it already. You gave us a lot of information about the historical development of Lebanon, but you chose clearly not to write journalistic or historical works about it, but novels. And you basically really indicated why you did that, why you want to tell stories rather than to analyze or to give commentary. And it actually reminded me a bit, especially with your latest novel, you want to give a voice to the missing people. And you actually started with this Yaki Nabut story about telling tales that may not have happened exactly this way, but you want to make something visible and you want to be something to be heard. It reminded me a bit of this famous quote by Milan Kundera, the Czech writer, who wrote that the struggle of man against power is the struggle of memory against forgetting. And that seems to be something very much involved here also. So you want to tell stories to avoid things being forgotten. Can you perhaps elaborate a bit about that, about what, for you, writing fiction rather than historical or journalistic analysis can add in your view to our view of Lebanon and more generally about forgetting and remembrance?
Yeah. So I think if there's one thing that we have become immune to in the past years, maybe, or especially, that's my impression, then it's misery, right? Or miserable news. We get them all the time, and they're so far away, and we know the numbers. I can tell you 300,000 people became homeless. I can tell you so many thousand people have drowned in the Mediterranean Sea while trying to get a better life, or trying to cross that sea in plastic boats. And these are numbers, and I think we have become deaf to these numbers. So they go to the head, but I think stories, they can go to the heart, and this is where they might do more, lead to a change of perspective, lead to you saying, I now want to know more. And now you finish that novel, it has entertained you, maybe it has taught you maybe something, and now you start Googling about Lebanon yourself because you got interested. And this is what news cannot do. I think this is the secret superpower of storytelling, and this is why I think it's a superior way of informing. Although it's not my goal to inform in the first place, I see myself as a storyteller that wants to entertain you. But I think entertainment is a great way to use information, and information in an entertaining story, wrapped up in an entertaining story, is just the best way to make you stick with the details and with the characters, but also you learn something.
Okay, thanks very much. We also have a first few questions from the audience online.
Yeah, I'm seeing them.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. I will start reading them because the attendees cannot see the questions the way we can. So we have a first question by Bente van der Nes, who's asking about the gender dimension. She's asking, in Latin America, women are the most important force in continuing to try to find information on the disappeared. And is this the same for Lebanon? Is it also a special role for women over there?
Yeah, I know. Bent is absolutely right. Especially in Argentina, you have the Madres de la Plaza de Mayo. They are the grandmothers or the mothers of the missing. They have been protesting. They have achieved a lot. And in Lebanon, it's the same. It's basically because mostly male people have gone missing, so it's the other side. The ones that are left are the females, and they are raising their voice, and they are fighting, and they are they won't stop fighting until the last day. But as I try to explain, the structures in Lebanon are so much more complicated, and there is no chain of command. It's impossible to trace back who's guilty and so on. So that and again, you have this government that is still in charge and that is still not interested at all in dealing with the past. So yes, it's the females, and it's also in the protest. You have seen probably all these pictures with the military opposing the protesters, and you had this line of women protecting the protesters from the military because they hoped that the military wouldn't dare to, to go against the women. And so you have really strong young women, especially in Lebanon, and you also had feminist movements on the rise in the past years, although you cannot compare them to feminist movements in Europe, just as they have different obstacles to overcome, and also different goals, but it is comparable somehow. And so I would, so yes, the answer is yes.
Okay, thanks very much. We have another question from Maaike, who's asking, I have followed the protests since October 2019, and I'm wondering how a new parliament, if the sectarian structure is, oh dear, the question is disappearing all of a sudden.
Oh yeah, it has disappeared.
Okay.
Maybe it's in, it's on the right if you go to answered.
Okay. Well, it wasn't even answered yet. Okay. So if the sectarian structure that you talked about is eliminated, so the assignment of seats to sectarian groups, how a new parliament should be formed according to the Lebanese people? And do you think there are enough non-sectarian political parties like Beirut Medinati or my city Beirut that can actually form a new parliament? So perhaps more concretely also, to what extent do you think the present generation of corrupt politicians that everybody wants out can actually be replaced by a new generation that actually will avoid this pitfall of corruption and nepotism?
Yeah, this is I mean, we probably have to make the distinction between the short-term goal of the revolution and the long-term goal of the revolution. And the short-term goal, this is what unifies the people. They have the slogan, everybody means everybody, which means everybody in this government should go. They should all resign. And they are united in this demand and in asking for complete change. If we now look at the long-term goals, I think this is where it gets complicated again. I think they haven't thought of that themselves in too much detail because they are so much occupied in aiming for a change now. But of course, if it comes again to replacing the seats and to the people, and they wish, they want to have a technocratic, is that the word? Is that right? A technocrat government, where the one taking care of environment is maybe, or economics is maybe someone who has studied economics and not the son-in-law of the president. And but are there enough people in Lebanon that would be able to do so? I don't know. And maybe if I think so, yes, they are. But the question is, will they get the opportunity to be proposed for these? And I think I talked about the constitution. I think if the revolution wants to have any success at all, this constitution, you have to start with the constitution. This constitution needs to be reformed completely. You need to reform that constitution that is based on sectarianism and basically invent a new form of government or constitution for that country. And this is, I think, when the revolution is successful in its short-term goal, this is where it will become ugly again, because there are so many different interests again when it comes to how to restructure the country, because there is not one society in Lebanon, unfortunately. There are 18 different parts of society with 18 different interests and 18 different also stories about the past, about guilt and innocence. And it will be very interesting to follow, but I'm not too optimistic, unfortunately. It's just too...
That almost immediately answers the next question, which actually is the question, to what extent are you actually hopeful or pessimistic about Lebanon's future? And it's, of course, it's difficult to be very optimistic, but perhaps also the question, can we actually afford to be pessimistic? Because, of course, the situation is so bad right now that one would like to think that it cannot get worse, but unfortunately it can always get worse.
Yeah.
So would you perhaps dare to say whether you dare to be optimistic in any respects at all?
I mean, in October 19, nobody thought it could get worse. That's why when people almost went on the street, and now the explosion happened, and we all see, oh wow, it was possible. We, so whenever you think it can get worse, Lebanon will come up with so will surprise you. If there's one thing I'm optimistic for, it's the youth, because we're talking about a whole post-war generation born after 1990 that is fed up now. They are 30 years old, like my cousin, he's 25. He calls me and asks, how can I come to Germany? I have no future here. There's nothing here left for me. They don't want, they don't expect much. They just want a decent life, and they want opportunities, and they want not to be fooled by the government and to be stolen from by the government. They would just want basic human rights, you can say. And for that, I'm optimistic that there might be some change. Also, my hope is that there will be international pressure, or my hope was that there would be more international pressure after the explosion. I mean, you saw that Macron, France, they went there to Lebanon, and many countries said they would give money for the reconstruction. But my hope was that they would say, we will give you all the money you need for the reconstruction, but you need to do reforms now. You need to listen to the people, to the demands of the people. You need, if necessary, step back and get new people in charge. And then we'll give you all the money you need. We will help you. But instead, most of that money just was given to Lebanon, and it will never get to the people. It will never get to where it's needed most. It will go to the, I mean, one example that was on the news a couple of days ago is Sri Lanka. I mean, this is a poor country itself, but Sri Lanka, they donated, I think, 10,000 tons of tea for the people in Lebanon. And these 10,000 tons of tea, they just went to the bodyguards of the president. How much tea can they drink? They will never have to buy tea in the rest of their life again. But this is how the system works, right? And the same goes with money. So, so I hope that the revolution will be successful, but at the same time, I hope that it will be successful without too many armed conflicts. And I'm not sure how this is going to work, because there are still many people supporting the people in charge. They have their crazy guys with their mopeds, and there are weapons, surrounding the protesters, scaring them. And so this is what scares me as well. Yeah. So I'm optimistic when we talk about the youth, because their anger is so big, and that might be just the fuel they need to stay on track and to try everything they can. But I don't dare to do a long-term, yeah.
Well, thanks very much. I think it was very clarifying. I am afraid that we will have to close down before long, because I was told that even though we are not physically in the Spy 25 building, they still have to close down. So perhaps if anybody in the audience has an urgent question, you still have about 1 minute to pose it. Of course, if I put it in such threatening terms, nobody will dare to ask a question, though. Oh yeah, okay, we got one more question. Would you expect a true reform of the parliament without Hezbollah getting violent? Perhaps answer yes or no and elaborate a bit, because otherwise the organizers will be getting angry with us.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps others too, actually, but...
No, I don't. I expect Hezbollah to get violent, but I also expect other groups, like on the Christian side, to get violent if it comes to removing their leaders from power.
Okay. Okay, I just get a message that we do indeed have to conclude right now, because one of the important computers may actually simply stop functioning at 6:15. So with my apologies for the urgency and the haste with which I'm rounding up, I would like to thank Pierre once again for a wonderful presentation. I would like to invite all people who attended the live video session, and who are also watching this on video either now or later on, do get any chance you get to get a copy of this book, either in German or in Dutch or in another language. Een lied voor de vermisten, it's Pierre's latest novel. His earlier novel, De Zoon van de Verhalenverteller, it's also still available. They make for wonderful reading, which makes his whole history turn alive for a moment, and it becomes much easier to identify with the people who have to live through all this. So I thank you for that, and I commend you for that. And I hope we can welcome you soon again in Amsterdam, but then really live and physically together, either in Spij 25 or in the Goethe Institute, both of which institutions I'd like to thank for their hospitality in getting Pierre to talk with us. And I wish all of you attending a pleasant evening, and I thank you for your interest. Thanks to all of you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.